certain loss, there's certain within my own heart and life and where I was going and what I was doing and how I was going to carry on.
He wore the tuxedo-like armor. To the world, Pierce Brosnan was James Bond, calm under fire, unshakable, and untouchable. But behind that polished smile was a man carrying a private storm. If you have searched Pierce Brosnan marriage, what happened to Pierce Brosnan's wife? Or did Pierce Brosnan divorce? You have seen the whispers. People say his marriage ended immediately after this. But was it a scandal or a tragedy? What really happened on December 28, 1991, that changed his life in a single heartbeat? The final breath. It wasn't a divorce filing, it was a final goodbye. In the public imagination, Pierce Brosnan's marriage ended immediately after this sounds like a scandal headline. In real life, it reads like a death certificate.
Really honored to be here tonight at the Russian Tea Room for the Chemotherapy Foundation. I lost my late wife, Cassandra, to ovarian cancer.
On December 28, 1991, Cassandra Harris, Pierce Brosnan's first wife, died after battling ovarian cancer. And in that instant, the marriage didn't fall apart. It stopped the way music stops when someone cuts the power. That is the part people rarely say out loud when they search for Pierce Brosnan's marriage, Pierce Brosnan's first wife, or what happened to Pierce Brosnan's wife. Death ends a marriage immediately because the law has no choice. The contract closes, the paperwork ends, and what is left is not legal language but memory. Imagine how brutal that switch is. One day, you are still somebody's husband, still making hospital trips, still whispering, "We've got this." And the next day, you are a widower with the same ring on your hand, but no one to come home to. By the late 1980s, Pierce was climbing. The roles were getting bigger, the pressure was getting louder, and Hollywood was starting to see him as the kind of man who could carry a franchise. But behind the scenes, the family was living on a different schedule, the kind that is measured in test results and waiting rooms. Cassandra had been an actress too, and she understood the spotlight from the inside. So when the cameras flashed and the interviews rolled, do you think she wanted the world to see fear on his face? Or do you think she wanted him to look steady, even when everything at home felt like it was shaking? Here's what makes this story sting. Ovarian cancer is not a cinematic villain that announces itself clearly. It can be quiet, stubborn, and relentless, and it forces families to become experts in exhaustion. How do you keep a brave face for the world while your home is running on worry? How do you film action scenes, hit your marks, smile for the crew, then drive back into the reality of hospitals and treatments? If you have ever had to laugh in public while breaking in private, you already understand the kind of performance that does not earn awards. When Cassandra died, the headlines reduced it to a line or two, the way the news often does with grief. The truth was simple. She was gone, and Pierce was left standing in the doorway of a life that would never be normal again. This is why people say his marriage ended immediately after this. Not because he chose to leave, because the one person who anchored the whole family was taken out of the world. And here is the haunting part that fans miss when they ask, did Pierce Brosnan divorce? You don't divorce a ghost. You don't file paperwork against a memory. You just keep living, carrying a silence that follows you into every new room. You can rebuild, you can even laugh again, but that first loss sits in the background like an unfinished sentence. So when you see him years later, older, calmer, still protective about his private life, ask yourself what it costs to be unshakable. But to really understand why this loss hit so hard, we have to rewind 5 years earlier to a move Pierce made in 1986 that wasn't about Hollywood at all. It was about family, identity, and a decision that changed their surname, their bonds, and their future. What was the quiet legal step he took that rewrote the family's DNA forever? The anchor of the name. Pierce didn't just want to be a stepfather. He wanted to be the only father they had left. And that is the part that changes how you hear the phrase, Pierce Brosnan's marriage ended immediately after this. Because long before December 28, 1991, He had already made a quiet decision that tied his life to Cassandra's children in a way no headline could undo. Rewind to 1986. Pierce Brosnan was still a rising name, not yet the global Bond icon people picture when they search Pierce Brosnan family or Pierce Brosnan wife. He was building momentum, taking roles, chasing stability. And in the middle of that climb, the family was hit with a hard reality. Charlotte and Christopher, Cassandra's two older children, had lost their biological father. Their dad, Dermot Harris, was gone. That is the moment most hidden truth videos skip, because it is not flashy, it is just heavy. So Pierce did something that sounds simple, but is actually enormous. He legally adopted Charlotte and Christopher, and they took his surname. Think about the meaning of that in plain language. This was not a temporary promise. It was paperwork that said, "I'm responsible, I'm here, I'm not leaving." If you have ever met someone who loves loudly but avoids commitment quietly, you know how rare that is. Would you have had the courage to sign your name on a future you can't control? This is why the Brosnan name matters in this story. People treat celebrity surnames like branding, like a logo on a perfume bottle. But for Pierce, the name was a shield. Adoption meant legal protection, inheritance rights, and stability if anything happened to Cassandra. It meant school forms, medical decisions, and the boring grown-up stuff that becomes life-saving when crisis hits in real life. And here is the gut punch. In the late 1980s, that crisis was already creeping closer, even if the world could not see it yet. Can you imagine sensing that something bad is coming and choosing to tighten the family bond instead of running? Also, let's talk about the timing. Taking on two teenagers is not a cute rom-com plot. It is real parenting, with real emotions, real rebellion, and real fear. And Pierce was doing it while his career was accelerating, which is usually when people get selfish, not more responsible. How do you show up for auditions and also show up for homework, grief, and bedtime conversations? How do you act 007 in public and just dad in private? And if you want the deeper why, it is right here. Cassandra wasn't only his wife. She was the center of the family's gravity, the home, the organizer, the calm voice. When Pierce adopted her children, he wasn't trying to replace anyone. He was trying to make sure they never felt abandoned twice. That is a different kind of love, the kind that does not pose for cameras. So when Cassandra's illness later tightened its grip, the family wasn't held together by romance alone. It was held together by a name, a signature, and a legal bond that said, "We are one unit." And that is why her death in 1991.
I held the generous, strong, beautiful hand of my first wife, Cassie, as ovarian cancer took her life.
Harris passed away in 1991 from ovarian cancer.
Didn't just end a marriage. It threatened to rip apart a whole structure Pierce had built with his own hands. Because now, the question becomes even sharper. If he had already chosen to become their father on paper in 1986, what did he do in the years after her diagnosis to keep that promise when the world was watching and the clock was ticking louder every day? The 4-year ghost. The answer is almost cruel in how simple it is. The diagnosis came when they were at their happiest, proving that life does not care about your bond status, your bank account, or how good you look in a tuxedo. By 1987, Pierce Brosnan and Cassandra Harris had built something that finally felt steady. They had a home, a blended family, and that new last name on the kids' documents that turned stepdad into dad for real. And then, ovarian cancer walked in like an uninvited guest that refuses to leave. This is where people searching Pierce Brosnan first wife or Pierce Brosnan marriage tragedy usually get the headline version. What they miss is the long middle, the part that lasts years, the part that turns love into a marathon. Think about the math. From 1987 to December 28, 1991 is 4 years. 4 years of appointments, treatments, good weeks that make you breathe again, and bad weeks that steal your sleep. 4 years of trying to keep life normal for the kids while your mind is quietly counting days. If you knew your time was limited, would you spend it in the spotlight or in the shadows? Would you try to travel, to celebrate, to pretend you are fine? Or would you want the smallest room possible with only the people you trust? And here's where the story starts to feel like a pattern, not just bad luck. Cassandra's mother also died of ovarian cancer. That detail matters because it turns the illness from a random tragedy into a family shadow. It's the kind of thing that sits in the background of conversations, even when nobody wants to say it. When people talk about a curse, they don't always mean magic. Sometimes they mean genetics, the quiet kind of risk that gets passed down like an unwanted inheritance. So while Pierce was out trying to build a career, Cassandra was fighting an enemy that did not care about movie schedules. That is the private reality behind searches like Pierce Brosnan's wife, Cassandra Harris, and what happened to Pierce Brosnan's first marriage. This was not a breakup. This was a slow, exhausting battle where the goal kept changing. First, you hope for a cure. Then you hope for more time. Then you hope for one peaceful day. Now ask yourself something uncomfortable. How does a man like Pierce deal with a villain he can't shoot his way out of? In an action movie, you get a final showdown. In real life, cancer does not give you a clean ending. It takes and takes, then asks for more. And because Pierce was becoming more recognizable, there was also the pressure to look fine in public. Not because he was fake, but because the world is hungry and careless, and it treats pain like entertainment. This is where the 4-year ghost idea comes in. Even before Cassandra passed, grief was already living in the house. It's there in the way you speak softer, the way you celebrate birthdays with a forced brightness, the way you memorize the route to the hospital without thinking. It's there in the way the kids watch their mother and realize they can't fix it. If you have ever tried to protect someone you love from a truth they can already feel, you know how impossible that is. And the cruel twist is what comes later. The part people don't connect until they see the whole timeline. That same shadow would eventually reach the next generation too, when Pierce's daughter Charlotte would later die from ovarian cancer.
Very sad news. Pierce Brosnan has suffered a tragic family loss. The actor's daughter, Charlotte, has died at her London home aged just 42 after battling ovarian cancer.
When you hear that, it rewires everything about the earlier years, because you realize this family was not just surviving one tragedy, they were living under a long, repeating echo. So by the time we reach 1991, you can understand why Cassandra's death didn't just end Pierce Brosnan's marriage. It ended the version of Pierce that believed love alone could keep a family safe. It left him with children he had promised to protect, and a fear that wasn't finished with them yet. And that brings us to the next chapter, because after Cassandra took her final breath, Pierce didn't just grieve privately. Hollywood was watching. The Bond conversation was circling, and the world was about to offer him the biggest role of his life. How do you step into James Bond when your real life has just been shattered and you're still trying to hold your family together? The 2-week secret. History has a cruel way of repeating itself, but Pierce found a way to make the ending beautiful because the 4-year ghost we just talked about did not stay in the past. It waited. It aged with the family. It sat quietly behind the smiles in the red carpet photos. And then, in 2013, it came back with the same name, the same diagnosis, and the same kind of fear that doesn't care if you are famous or broke. Pierce Brosnan's adopted daughter, Charlotte, became a mother, built a life, and still ended up facing ovarian cancer too. That detail alone changes how you read the whole story of Pierce Brosnan's first wife, Cassandra Harris. It stops being a single tragedy and starts feeling like a pattern that keeps knocking on the same door. If you knew your family had already been hit by something like this once, would you live with constant anxiety, or would you try to block it out just to survive day to day? On June 28, 2013, Charlotte died of ovarian cancer. Pierce confirmed it publicly, and he made it clear she was surrounded by love, including her husband and children. The world saw the headline and moved on. But the family was living in a completely different universe, one where time is measured in hospital visits, whispered conversations, and the soft panic of how much longer. And here comes the detail that makes people stop mid-scroll. Reports said Pierce walked Charlotte down the aisle in a private wedding ceremony about 2 weeks before she died. Not a big celebrity wedding, not a glossy magazine spread, a quiet moment protected from the noise. Think about what that means emotionally. This is James Bond, the face of cool, the guy people expect to handle danger with a smirk. And yet, the most important mission of that period had nothing to do with movies. It was a father giving his daughter one last milestone, one last memory she could carry while everything else was slipping away. What is the ultimate act of love? Is it the wedding itself? Or is it the decision to make it happen, even when you know you're racing against the clock? This is also where the contrast hits hardest. In the Bond films, the stakes are high, but the hero always has an exit. In real life, there is no eject button for grief. Pierce couldn't charm his way out of a hospital room. He couldn't outrun a genetic risk. He couldn't negotiate with a disease that already taken Cassandra back in 1991. So what does a person do when life hands them the same pain twice, just in a different decade? Here's the hidden truth the mainstream skips part. Families like this don't just lose people, they lose innocence. After Cassandra died, Pierce was not only a widower, he was a father trying to keep 2 young people stable. And years later, when Charlotte faced the same diagnosis, it was like the past reopened with the same handwriting. This is why people call it a triple tragedy when you zoom out, because the illness is not a one-off event in their family story. Ovarian cancer touched Cassandra and later Charlotte, and it also haunted Cassandra's side of the family history. It's not superstition. It's that awful feeling of repetition that makes you wonder if fate has a favorite target. Have you ever noticed how the most painful moments in life are often the ones we keep most private? The biggest smiles sometimes happen right beside the biggest sorrow. A father can be on a red carpet one week and in a hospital room the next, and you would never know unless he tells you. That privacy is not secrecy for drama. It is protection. It is the family trying to own their own grief instead of letting the internet turn it into content. And here's another question to sit with. If you were Pierce, would you want the world watching your heartbreak in real time? Or would you keep it small, quiet, and sacred, even if people accuse you of being cold because you are not sharing enough? After Charlotte's death, Pierce spoke with the kind of careful honesty that tells you he has lived with this pain for a long time. He didn't dress it up. He didn't turn it into a speech. He honored her, named the disease, and reminded the world that this is not rare, not distant, not only a celebrity issue. It's the kind of illness that can hide until it is loud. And by then, families are already in survival mode. So when you hear the title, Pierce Brosnan's marriage ended immediately after this, understand the deeper twist. The first marriage ended with Cassandra's last breath in 1991. But the consequences of that marriage, the family he built through adoption, the promise he signed in 1986, kept unfolding decades later. The ending didn't stop, it echoed. And that sets up the next chapter perfectly, because after losing Cassandra and then Charlotte, Pierce had to decide what kind of man he would be in the aftermath.
Cassandra became seriously ill while filming a movie in India in 1987, and it was discovered she had ovarian cancer. She died a few years later in 1991 when she was 43 and Pierce was 38. His eldest stepdaughter also died of ovarian cancer in 2013.
Would he shut down, disappear, and let grief define him? Or would he build a new kind of love with Keely Shea Smith that didn't replace the past, but learned how to live beside it? The North Star. She wasn't a replacement, she was a life raft. After Cassandra, Pierce Brosnan didn't walk back into dating like it was a normal next step. He walked back into life carefully, like a man testing thin ice. He was raising a family, carrying a private history, and still hearing the word Bond circle him like a spotlight that never blinks. So when people ask, how did Pierce Brosnan move on? The real answer is that he didn't erase anything. He found someone who could sit beside the pain without trying to compete with it. That someone was Keely Shea Smith. They met in 1994 in Cabo San Lucas, Mexico. No violins, no staged romance. Just two adults at a moment where honesty mattered more than impressing each other. Keely was a journalist and presenter used to asking questions for a living, not posing as an accessory on a movie star's arm. And Pierce, fresh from widowhood and fatherhood, needed reality, not performance. Have you ever met someone and felt your shoulders drop, like your body finally believes it can breathe? What makes this part of the Pierce Brosnan love story different is what it does not have. It doesn't have quick rebound energy. It doesn't have tabloid chaos. It has patience. They built trust before they built a headline. And that matters in a world where celebrity marriages get treated like disposable fashion. In a world of disposable relationships, what does a 25-year marriage look like to you? Is it fireworks every day, or is it two people choosing each other on the boring Tuesdays too? Keely becomes the North Star because she arrives when Pierce is tired. Not tired like, I need a holiday. Tired like, I have survived things that changed me. By the time he's fully stamped as the James Bond star, he's already learned the difference between attention and love. And you can hear that difference in how he talks about her over the years. Not as a trophy, but as a partner, a mother, and a steady presence when life gets loud. Then the internet does what the internet does. People get obsessed with how Keely looks, especially her weight, as if a woman's body is a public voting booth. Pierce's stance has been steady. He loves her as she is, and he refuses to let strangers rewrite their marriage. Do you think the internet is too hard on celebrity wives who don't fit a specific mold? And why do people act shocked when a man stays loyal to the person who held him together off camera? Here's the hidden truth that undercuts those divorce lawyer-style videos. Their longevity is not because Pierce found a perfect image. It's because he found a safe place. It was quiet, stubborn love, the kind you can actually live inside. Keely stood with him through grief anniversaries, through parenting, through the burnout that fame brings. She wasn't there to be a Bond girl. She was there to be a lighthouse. And that's why the story doesn't end with, he remarried. It continues with, he rebuilt. Because when people look at Pierce Brosnan and Keely Shea Brosnan, they often see optics. What they miss is function. This marriage works because it was designed for real life, not for the red carpet. But there's still one more layer people don't talk about, and it's the one that turns this from a love story into a survival story.
Keely has struggled with her weight for years. She's been open about her struggles with body image and self-esteem and decided to take action to improve her health and well-being.
What happened when the past came back? Not as a memory, but as a warning that the same tragedy could strike again. 2026. The burnout and the comeback. So here we are in the now part of the story, where the cameras get sharper, the gossip gets louder, and the real question gets quieter. Pierce is 72, still booking work, still painting, still talking like a man who hears the James Bond theme in the distance and wants one more walk down that corridor. A recent report said Keely is worried he might be pushing too hard, that the pace could lead to burnout. If you've ever watched someone you love run on pure willpower, you know that fear. It's the voice that says, I want you alive more than I want you legendary. Because here's what the headlines love to do. They turn concern into conflict. They take I miss you and translate it into we're falling apart. That same report painted a picture of Keely wanting more slow mornings and more time together in places like Kauai and Malibu, while Pierce keeps scanning scripts, still tempted by roles, even teasing the idea of an older Bond. So let me ask you, when a couple argues about time, is that really a marriage in trouble? Or is that a marriage that still matters enough to fight for? And if we're talking about receipts, the real ones aren't in insider quotes. They're in patterns. Keely has been the steady hand through decades of travel, long shoots, and public noise. Pierce has never sold her as a trophy. He's treated her like a teammate. That's why the internet's favorite rumor, the separation whisper, doesn't land when you actually look at their behavior. They show up together. They move like two people who have already survived the worst chapters and refuse to let strangers write a fake ending. Now add one more layer, because 2026 didn't just bring work chatter. It brought body talk, too. A viral wave started circling about a dramatic 99-pound transformation, with clips, before and after energy that makes people click and think slowly. Maybe you've seen that kind of content. It's loud, it's confident, and it rarely tells you what's real, what's staged, and what's none of our business. But here's what matters for our story. The version that keeps showing up is not Pierce running away. It's Pierce and Keely running toward health together. After losing Cassandra, after watching the same illness come for Charlotte years later, the body stops feeling like a background detail. It becomes the mission. Sleep becomes a strategy. Food becomes fuel. Peace becomes medicine. So when Keely worries about burnout, it's not a nagging wife cliché. It's a woman who has already seen how fast life can flip, and she's trying to protect the man she loves from becoming another headline. So what do you want for him? Do you want old man Bond, bruised knuckles and silver hair, proving he can still do it? Or do you want the quieter win, the one where he closes the laptop, puts the scripts down and takes the long walk with Keely because he's finally choosing time over applause? And if he does come back, should it be for ego or for joy? Because the truth is, Pierce Brosnan's first marriage didn't end with betrayal. It ended with a heartbeat stopping. And ever since, his whole life has been shaped by one private promise. If love survives the worst, you protect it like it's rare. Which brings us to the final question this story keeps circling. The one nobody asks out loud. After all this loss, what does happily ever after even look like for Pierce Brosnan? The legacy of the name. And that brings us back to the quiet thread running under every headline in this story. Not the tux, not the Aston Martin, the name. Because the bond that truly mattered in Pierce Brosnan's life was never just the one on a movie poster. It was the legal name he gave to a family that was already bruised by loss. When he adopted Christopher and Charlotte, he wasn't doing Hollywood branding. He was building a shelter. In the most practical way possible, he was saying, if something happens, you are not floating. And once you see it that way, the marriage that ended immediately in 1991 did not end with papers or lawyers. It ended with Cassandra Harris's final breath, and the name Brosnan became the rope that kept the kids tied to something solid. Think about how heavy that is. You can play a hero on screen for 2 hours, and then the credits roll. But being a father is a long film with no closing night. Christopher carried that name into adulthood, even while life got complicated. Charlotte carried it too, and even after she was gone, the name still stayed in the room, like a framed photo you cannot walk past without remembering. Then Keely enters the story, and the name keeps expanding, not as a brand, but as a blueprint. Pierce and Keely's children, Dylan and Paris, grew up with a different version of him. Not the man collapsing under grief in private, but the man trying to turn grief into structure. A school run, a family dinner, a habit of showing up. That is how tragedies get recycled into something safer. That is how a fortress is built, one ordinary day at a time. So when people ask, what is Pierce Brosnan's real legacy? Here's the answer the internet usually skips. It is not box office totals. It is not how many times he wore the Bond suit. It is the fact that he took a shattered family, signed his name where it mattered, and refused to let loss be the final author. Let me ask you something. When people think of Pierce Brosnan 100 years from now, do you think they will remember the spy or the father? And bigger than that, what legacy are you building today in the small choices you make when nobody is watching? Pierce Brosnan's story isn't really about a marriage ending. It's about a man who refused to let grief write the last line. From Cassandra's loss in 1991 to the strength he and Keely show today, the strongest bond was always family. Did this change how you see Hollywood's most famous spy? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Hit like if you believe in lasting love, and subscribe for more untold truths next time, friends.